I think you get to a point in your life sometimes where your sort of routine gets really familiar, and it's nice to sort of challenge yourself and want to go somewhere and just explore something completely new. So that was a big attraction of coming to Orkney. I think looking back on myself and how I sort of slipped into depression, I had been building up for a while, but actually I suppose the effects of it were quite sudden. I remember one day I just felt like almost like just in a daze, almost like that I couldn't, yeah, almost like I'd been metaphorically hit by a bus, and I was just in a bit of a daze. I remember that just one day, and then the following day I woke up in a bit of a panic, sweating, and my anxiety was really high. And then that's when I sort of, over the kind of the days that followed that, I realised that I was depressed. So it was something that I'd been building up in the background with a few things going on in my life, and then just suddenly it hit me, and I found it really hard to deal with it. It was quite a sort of a shocking thing to go through. Even like, I guess looking back at it, it's almost like living through a nightmare. It's almost like something that isn't real. Like looking back on it, 'cause it feels like I'm looking back on the memories of a different person. And yeah, it was just such a difficult, hard thing to be experiencing. I wasn't eating almost anything. I can remember there was a couple of weeks where I probably had a bit of toast and an apple or something like that. The weight was dropping off me. So the experience of that was quite an upsetting thing for me to go through. And then I remember trying to just kind of keep a routine and not want people to worry about me and how I was sort of feeling. So I was hoping that I was just going to maybe just kind of like come out of it. So for example, at work, I remember just the feeling that I was sort of having, the anxiety being high, and just how the negative thoughts and negative feelings, what would actually do would be I'd go out to my car in the car park and then drive to the other side of the car park where I know that my colleagues can see me. And I'd just sit and cry. I would sit and cry for like 10 or 15 minutes away, sort of behind some trees where no one could see me, and then kind of wipe away the tears, then drive back and go back into the office as if everything was normal, but it obviously wasn't normal. When I was really in the grips of how I was feeling with depression, anxiety being really high, I probably didn't feel comfortable enough to be open with people about it. I remember even speaking to my GP about how I was feeling, because I was struggling to sleep. That was the biggest thing that I was speaking to my GP about. I remember being asked, "Is suicidal? Is that something you're thinking about?" And I remember saying no, because I didn't want to say yes, even though that's how I was feeling. Because I thought, are they going to then say to my parents? Are they going to say to people around me? I didn't want people to worry about me and how I was feeling. So I just sort of kind of persisted with it. Thankfully, kind of as it was sort of going on, a close friend of mine, Megan, who I was working beside at the time, somehow convinced me to just come out with her on a Saturday to go for a walk. And hill walking wasn't really something I'd really done before at all. And we went out walking, and I think it felt better to just maybe go out and get some exercise and to kind of open up. And I maybe kind of spoke a bit more about how I was feeling to her. And then the following weekend, even though she wasn't free that weekend, I decided that actually I must have enjoyed it so much that I thought I'm going to go out on another hill. So I did another hill that weekend. And then as the weekends followed, I just kept going up hills and sort of realising the benefits of it. And I think having that chance to be out with someone, maybe outdoors walking side by side with somebody where I think it's a bit more easier to open up about how you're feeling, that's when I could sort of talk about what I was going through. And I think that with taking up this new hobby of hill walking that I realised was so beneficial, that's what started to bring me out of how I was feeling. With Megan, I think because we were working side by side in the same office, it would have been probably very obvious to Megan that I was going through something, being that we were friends but also colleagues as well. Because I can remember trying to sit at the computer, trying to type something out, and I'd probably be sitting there for 15 minutes and I'd probably just kind of typed a sentence or something. I just could not concentrate or focus on anything really. It was important to have her there to recognise what was going on in myself, and maybe in a way that I wouldn't want to share in an open way with other people. So that was such an important intervention, I think. It was a big shock to go through what I did, and to suddenly wake up in the morning with your anxiety really high. But actually looking back on it, I think reflectively, there was quite a lot of things that were going on in my life building up to that moment. So although it felt like a shock at the time, there's quite a few things, whether it was a relationship breaking down, or kind of things going on with family members. I'd lost a couple of close family members in kind of the months before that, and I was just putting a huge amount of pressure on myself, kind of career-wise and work-wise. Didn't really have any sort of work-life balance, just pushing myself far too hard. So now looking back, I can see all those things were building up and building up and building up, and then just suddenly it hit me, like a bus hitting me, metaphorically. That is just how it felt. Just felt like being hit by a bus, all of a sudden. So yeah, it was really, I guess, in the kind of the weeks that followed, that was about just trying to kind of get my head around what was going on. And that was scary as well for myself, that wherever I sort of come to in life, since then or before then, I'd always feel quite optimistic or hopeful about something. Whereas there, I'd lost all hope and just didn't want to be here. And there was a point where when I realised that suicide was an option, that as soon as I thought of it, I actually felt a bit of relief when I felt like that, because I thought, I don't need to keep living this life of day by day where I'm just completely hopeless and crying every day. It was just an awful thing. And yeah, so I sort of made a plan for kind of when, where and how, which is again scary for me to sort of look back on, thinking that was something I was thinking about. But thankfully I managed to pull away from that in over a period of weeks to recover from that depression. I was going through all that, and I was still managing to go into work, albeit not at kind of working 100%, but the idea that I can kind of go into work and sort of look people in the eye, try to just pretend like everything was normal, must have taken a huge amount of strength from myself to get through that. Pretty amazing looking back to think I did that. But if I was to give myself advice, looking back at myself in that period of depression, I would say, no, get off work, get yourself sorted out. There's no reason to go into work for things. There's more important things in life than that. The experience of going through that period with depression and suicidal thoughts, it's definitely changed me, and I think in the most part a positive way. I think that probably one of the biggest things that I've taken from it is that it's made me more aware of my mental health, and the fact that I've lived with anxiety for most of my adult life, and that wasn't something I was aware of before I went through what I did. And I've realised about the importance of a work-life balance. I've understood that there's things that, like hill walking, like exercising, things like that are so good for my mental health, that I should be doing more of, because it is good for me. Whether I'm in that period where I was going through depression, or just in general, where things can be stressful in life, it's just good to go out for a walk and just sort of feel a bit better after that. But I think what's also really important that I think I learned from that is that I now have that insight into what it must be like for a lot of people that have those sort of thoughts. And before, I wouldn't have really appreciated that. I wouldn't have understood what it must be like for somebody gripped by depression, how much it can just feel like you're drowning. It can just feel like nothing's working. You feel completely hopeless, to really understand that what people must be going through, which is an awful thing. In terms of my recovery, there was quite a few things that helped with that. I think a big one was the being open about how I was feeling, whether that's with colleagues that are close to myself, or friends or family, to be a bit more open. I remember the first conversation I had with my boss around how I was feeling, and he could not be more supportive about that. And just saying, you can take time off if you want, if kind of the routine of coming into the office is something that you want to keep going, or you want to do different days, just anything, just to be supportive and making sure my well-being was okay. So I think just being open with other people was really beneficial. But a huge thing that was a real game changer was the fact that I'd taken up hill walking, this new hobby that I'd only done just a couple of times maybe in the past. It just wasn't really a thing I did at all. And then just suddenly, weekend after weekend, I'd go into this routine of going up mountains, which I just absolutely loved. And there were times where because it took a long time to really get out of how I was feeling over time, to the point where, for example, I remember driving a couple of 2.5 hours to Crianlarich to go up a mountain there, and I maybe got about, I don't know, 15 minutes into the walk, and I just remember just that sort of the depression and negativity. I was just like, I don't feel like this today. And I go back in the car and drove all the way back. I just went to my bed that day, but then the following weekend, and maybe feel a bit more optimistic, I went to kind of the same hill and went back up it, and that sort of sense of achievement, that sort of, I couldn't do it last week, that's fine, but I've done it this week. So I just started to feel like I was on that sort of maybe a road to recovery, and just how I was feeling, just feeling a bit more positive and less negative. Whether it's the sense of achievement of getting to the top, and then when you get to the top, you're looking out on, particularly living in Scotland, like there's landscapes in Scotland, we're just living in such an incredibly beautiful country. So the idea of just sort of looking out on a landscape and all these giant mountains around you, it makes you feel small, but in a really nice way. It sort of makes you put things in perspective. And when you're outdoors, you're usually walking side by side with people, and it's so much easier to sort of talk about how you're feeling. And it's that exercise as well. Any form of exercise is really good for you. It just sort of releases endorphins in your system. You just feel a little bit happier, and sort of the anxiety sort of drops off a bit. So there's so many elements of why hill walking is good, and I think it's not an exaggeration to say if it wasn't for getting into hill walking, it wasn't for my friend Megan getting me into hill walking, I might not be here. And that's something I appreciate, the fact that it was so beneficial in my recovery from what I was going through. If I was to go back and speak to myself in that position, I would give myself that reassurance that it feels so bad now. It doesn't feel like it's going to get better. I know it feels completely hopeless, but that's part of just the, I guess, of going through depression. It makes you don't think clearly. And I think for anybody that's sort of going through something similar, to at least in the first instance, open up about how you're feeling. And it was certainly for when I went through counselling, that was such a big thing. And I remember the first session that I had coming out of it, I just felt so much better. I just felt like almost like my brain had been massaged coming out of it. It felt so good. So I was in that position where I just was completely hopeless, and I've managed to come through it. So if people can, I guess, just be open about how they're feeling in the first instance, and seek that help and support, whether it's through counselling or other things, then they can get through it. Got a wee Wednesday called Dex. So I remember that kind of second weekend after that kind of first weekend of first getting into hill walking, I remember going out, we did Ben Honze in Perthshire. We got lost, me and Dex got lost on the way up. I remember it was quite misty. We managed to finally get to the top, and I just remember that feeling getting to the top with him. I thought, this wee dog, like, he's just a Westie, he's got these really wee legs. The idea was that I'm just going to start walking, and then maybe half an hour in or something like that, if it looks like he's getting tired, just go back to the car, it's fine, I'll go back another time. But he kept going, and he was literally dragging me up the hill, just so much energy. And it was really nice, because with Munro bagging, it gave me that focus. And as I got into it, and as I came out of depression, I made it my target to do all the Munros. And then, so after being within 5 years from that kind of first Munro that I did, to almost exactly 5 years, I did my last Munro. I did the 282nd Munro, and Dex was there for my last one as well. So that was a really special thing to think he'd been there right at the start of the hill walking journey, and then he was there at the end of it as well. It's such an amazing companion to have.